back then, police officers in the Bureau did stuff that they probably shouldn't have done. And what I mean by that is we would go out and do a dope deal and there would just be two of us. You'd buy dope and I'd back you up. That was it. And that was the way everybody did it. That's the way we were taught. And what I'm saying, that's not the way you probably should have done it. When we would do prostitution stings, it would be three of us. It'd be a female undercover copper and two guys, and that was it. So what I'm saying is you never knew when danger was going to come, but you never thought of it because that's the way you were taught. That's the way everybody did it before you, so that's what you did. And why I say that is we did a sting, and I'll tell you two stings. We did a sting out at the airport. We got hired by a guy that was running a prostitution business. He hired the undercover. And reason we were after him is he was manufacturing child pornography. And that was the goal of trying to get this guy. So before he would let us get into the manufacturing of child pornography, he wanted the female undercover to go see a really special client of his. $150 for sex, basically. So he set it up. We wired her up. She goes out to the airport and goes to this hotel room and meets this guy. Well, the deal is made, sex for money. And she goes,
are you guys following behind in a van or?
No, we're in the hallway. She's in the room. We're in the hallway monitoring the listening device that she's wearing. And she gives a code word. And believe it or not, your listeners might get a joke. But the code word back then, because you have to make fun of some of this, we used to say potato soup. And reason
working that into
and the reason we would say something because it was so out of normal, because some coppers would use like, oh, it looks good, and you would think, well, what happens if you're looking at something like food and it looks good, and we barged the door down. So we told guys, and I trained guys, you got to use something that is not part of the conversation. So we told her potato soup. So she was talking, blah, blah, and something along the lines, probably like, oh, yeah, I had lunch and I ate potato soup. Man, my stomach don't feel good. Well, there you go. So anyway, we knock on the door and get in. And the person in the room turns out to be the head prosecutor for St. Louis City, George Peach.
Oh, man.
And that was a firestorm when we did that guy. A lot of your listeners may remember.
Did you know it, or you were sitting in the hallway thinking this is just going to be some random guy?
We had no, and people thought that we knew it, that we may have said. We had no clue we were being sent that. Like so, we were sent to him by a third party to service him before we could get into child pornography. And when I walked into the room, I'm looking at him and I'm like, I know this guy. But he had a flannel shirt on and blue jeans. And usually he's always in suit and tie. And I'm thinking, man, I go, you got ID? And he throws his city ID, which shows he's a prosecutor for St. Louis City. I mean, he's like the boss. And I'm like, oh my God, now what? So obviously being a low man on the totem pole, I call supervisors and says, you may want to come out here, make a decision what we're going to do. And I can go into a longer part of the story, but I'll brief it up.
By all means, we got all the time. There's unlimited amount of tape here. So.
I will say stuff that right now that probably if a supervisor from St. Louis County is listening back then would not be happy with is when we caught Peach, we were ordered to come back to. Now, we took all this information and didn't arrest him, didn't do anything. We left him, and we all went back to headquarters, and I was given the task, being the oldest guy there, to write the report, which I wrote most of them anyway. So I wrote the report the way it happened, and I turned it in, and I was told to write it where charges really couldn't be brought against him.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Who you don't have to name names, but it's somebody that's your supervisor that's saying, hey.
A fairly high supervisor. A couple levels up.
So write it in such a way that if somebody were to read it.
If you would read it and the prosecutor would read, because we weren't going to take it to the prosecutor because there wasn't enough evidence in the report. But if somebody would have found out and pulled the report, they would have gone, well, they never had a case anyway. Okay. So follow me? That didn't sit well with me at all. And I remember having a little bit of an argument and saying, this is not right. I said, I will write it, but I'm going to write it based on your directions. And they go, what do you mean? I'm going to say, it's going to start off, per the authority of blah, 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 the following circumstances have happened. And they weren't happy with that either.
Because they didn't want their name on that
Absolutely.
line. Yeah.
And you got to remember now, this guy was a very important person. I mean, we were getting calls from all the daytime talk shows. I mean, wanting interviews from us on this guy, and we were told we couldn't talk to anybody. I ultimately made a copy of the original report to protect myself, because I figured if I write a report that's not true and he decides to sue, I'm the one who's going to get it. And so I made a copy. I turned in the change report under protest, and ultimately he was found that he had done other things while in office, embezzling money. They found it later on, and they came back and go, we're going to go ahead and keep that original report. And I distinctly remember opening up my drawer and pulling out the original. I go, here it is. And they just kind of looked at me, and I said, you weren't going to put me in a trick bag on this case. I'm just going to let you know that. So that's the way that happened. A lot of people don't know that on that case. I'm probably shocked, but I think they didn't want the head prosecutor to take charges.
Holy jeez.
So.
And so as you're writing this up, are you thinking my career is on the line?
I thought of a lot of stuff. I mean, I thought of, well, if I don't write it, I'm definitely getting kicked out of the bureau. It's going to be, it's going to black flag me my whole career. If I do write it, I'm basically lying in a report. I'm covering for somebody that I shouldn't be covering for.
And you don't care about him.
I don't
he's
care
doing
about
something
him,
wrong. Yeah.
You know, but I thought, okay, I'll write it based on you telling me. And that way it puts it back on them. So they ultimately never did submit that change report in the system. They held on to it. And then when all this other stuff came out.
But it did come out in the news that he had been trying to pick up a prostitute.
Oh yeah, it was big news. Big news. If you Google his name, it was big news here in St. Louis. Yeah, because he was real big against pornography, prostitution. I mean, he was one of those crusader type guys, and here he gets caught. You know, and top of, like I said, they found out that he was embezzling money to pay for the prostitution stuff as well. I think he gave up his law license, and he pled guilty to some felonies, and they actually tried it in Cole County because he couldn't do it in St. Louis. Everybody knew him. So I don't know whatever happened to him.
Thanks for watching this podcast short. You can find the rest of the interview on my channel. If you like this video, I hope you'll hit the like button and consider subscribing. I release a new interview with an interesting person every Wednesday morning.